these topics, risk of extreme heat in climate change. I think it is very relevant for us because we have a huge, Himalayas here, because we are very susceptible with this extreme heat. So it will be very useful. Your presentation and your discussion will be very, very useful for the young engineers and all the others who are working in this field.
Possible collaboration with City University New York, and then introduce our presenter, Neil Karkar, and then there will be a main presentation by him in 3 parts. The first one is methods for probabilistic risk assessment of heat extremes, humid heat and its connection with irrigation, impacts of and adaptation to extreme heat. And then there will be 25 minutes for the question answer, and particularly it doesn't need to be addressed to him only, but maybe we can have an open discussion and look forward to work together, how we can move ahead. And finally, I'd like to, at the end, request our chair to conclude within 5 minutes. Maybe the president, you may want to come forward and sit. Are you okay with that? Okay. Sorry, I'm not very much good in making it formal. So this event, in fact, is a part of also a continuation of celebration of Nepal National Glacier, Water and Weather Week. Last week, we marked 3 important days that we had. The first one is March 21, the first time in 2025. The first is a World Day Glaciers, highlighting the need to protect our fragile mountain cryosphere. And the second, World Water Day, emphasizing the importance of water for sustainable development. And this year, both World Day of Glaciers and World Water Day both emphasize the importance of glaciers, and they were dedicated to the glacier preservation. And on March 23rd, World Meteorological Day, WMO Day, focusing on meteorological advancements and climate action. This year, the theme of World Meteorological Day 2025 was closing the early warning gap together. So it highlights the critical role of meteorology in addressing climate change, disaster preparedness, and resilience. So definitely today's topic, extreme heat, is one of the most pressing climate challenges we face today, making today's discussion very much highly relevant. And we all know that the last year, 2024, was the hottest ever recorded year as per the WMO, and these changes in our environments are driving more extreme weather events. So while we officially concluded Nepal National Glacier Water Weather Week, we remain committed to extending our efforts beyond the week. So this is one of the post-week activities, reinforcing our dedication to climate awareness and action. So I'd like to introduce, this is my privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker, Neil Karkar. Dr. Karkar is an associate professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at the City College of New York. His research focuses on climate science, hydrology, and environmental sustainability. He specializes in probabilistic risk assessment, extreme weather prediction, and adaptation strategies. At City University of New York, his research is dedicated to understanding the Earth's water and carbon cycles, particularly in the context of global warming and human activity. To improve forecast activity, his work leverages satellite data and machine learning techniques to monitor critical resources such as water availability, droughts, and floods. His collaborations with NASA, GIS provides invaluable insights into how plant dynamics, soil moisture, and groundwater interact to shape weather and climate patterns. Dr. Karkar holds a PhD from Caltech, where he focused on the distribution of gases such as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and oceans. He is a postdoctoral research at Berkeley uses sensor networks to gain new insights into forest water flow. With over 100 publications, including journal articles, books, and book chapters, Dr. Karkar has made a substantial contribution to the fields of environmental science, climate change, and water resource management. He serves as an editor for several prestigious journals such as Advances in Civil Engineering, Applied Sciences, Climate, Land, Open Geosciences, Frontiers in Environmental Science, Scientific Reports, and Plus One, and has edited special issues on topics like the Mediterranean climate, heat waves, and geostatistics. In addition to his research, Dr. Karkar is actively involved in teaching and mentoring students at City University of New York, where he offers courses on numerical methods, remote sensing, and sustainability in civil engineering. He is a member of the ASC Committee on Adaptation to Climate Change and has participated in various NOAA initiatives, including the Climate Prediction Task Force. Throughout his career, Dr. Karkar has been involved in many impactful projects. These include enhancing drought prediction for New York City water supply and improving seasonal temperature and precipitation forecasts through dynamic modeling. He has also co-developed the Body Safe Index, very interesting, and a HEAP Index with Dr. Jesse C. Karkar. I think it was on the slide. I don't know where it was. No, okay. Anyway, so those were the two, yes, health matrices, ABSI and HEAP indexes, which offer important insights into the correlations between body measurements, health, and longevity. We at the Small Earth Nepal are honored to host him as a Fulbright specialist. He is, in fact, the 5th Fulbright specialist SEN has hosted till now. This is the second visit of in this year. His expertise has greatly benefited climate research and capacity building in Nepal. He has led two major USAID funded projects in Nepal. The first one was adaptation for climate change by livestock smallholders in Gandaki River Basin. That was 2012 to 2015. And Dr. Madan Lal Shrestha was co-lead from Nepal under the USAID Livestock Climate Change CRESP. And the second one was immediately after that, he led participatory biodiversity and climate change assessment for integrated pest management in Chitwan Annapurna landscape, 2015-2017, under USAID IPM-IL. Both projects focused on climate adaptation, biodiversity, and sustainable resource management. So he led two projects, but he's now collaborators, and he was also an international collaborator as a part of APN, Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research Project, for international conference on climate change, innovation, and resilience for sustainable livelihood in 2015. This initiative was led by Dr. Madan Lal Shrestha. Fortunately, we have him here representing the Small Earth Nepal, and it has two collaborators, one from Colorado State University and the other one from the Department of Hydrology and Meteorology, DHM. Currently, he is a main collaborator on the APN project that I am leading now. The project title is Enhancing Climate Resilience in South Asia and China, predicting precipitation shifts and their impacts in disaster risk reduction and resource security. So this is mainly focused in South Asia and China. We are now working on an MOU between Tribhuvan University and his university, City University of New York. We have already met with Executive Director of International Center, also Dean of Institute of Science and Technology. So we are trying to formalize our relationship. Definitely his knowledge is helping to strengthen disaster risk reduction and resource security across the region. His research spans, as I said, a lot of topics, especially on climate modeling and statistical analysis and geospatial techniques. He also works on health impacts of climate change, including heat stress and urban resilience strategies. Beyond research, he is committed to training and mentoring graduate and undergraduate students in Nepal and South Asia. So from today also, we have started one TOT, or education for educators. The training is for today and tomorrow. So most of the graduate and undergraduate students are going to be future scientists on climate. So we are fortunate to have him here today. He will be sharing on the risks of extreme heats in a changing climate. So this is a critical issue, as we were discussing earlier as well, and especially for Nepal, where heat extremes are becoming more frequent and severe. So please join me to welcome Dr. Nirka Kaur.
And so I'm glad to be able to be here and speak with you on this topic, which I think is an important one. So that's why I tend to talk about it quite a bit. So this is not a very long talk, but I'll try to strike a balance between mentioning some of my own research and giving a more general overview of the topic. So hopefully you'll learn some things. And again, unfortunately, I won't be able to talk about all aspects of this topic, but if people have questions, we can go into those in more depth afterwards. Okay, and I think the program has some more of the overall topics of the talk. So let's start with this. So when we talk about global warming, right, we're mostly looking at the average temperature, right? So when you talk about the warmest year on record, for example, as Dheeraj was mentioning, that's referring to the average temperature. But we also need to know about the most extreme temperatures, right? So especially in this case, the hottest temperatures, right? So how are those changing? So basically, we can think about whether are those warming at the same rate as the average temperature, or are those warming faster or slower? And that's particularly important, right, because these extreme temperatures might have the biggest impacts on both on human health and different aspects of the economies and infrastructures for the engineers, and as well as aspects of ecosystems, right, and so forth. And in fact, there is realization that this is very important. For example, the IPCC Working Group 1 report a few years ago, right, has a whole chapter of 254 pages on extremes specifically. And part of the extremes is the temperature extremes, so including the hottest temperature. So one measure of the hottest temperature is this TXX, which is the hottest temperature measured in a location each year, right? So for the maximum temperature for that year. So that's a measure of the extreme temperature, right? So how is that changing? So this map is from the IPCC report, shows based on station observations how fast that measure of extreme temperature is changing. On average, that is warming at the same rate as the mean temperature. Right, so even though this map may not be the same as the map for the warming of mean temperature, on average, the warming is about the same. But the IPCC report mentions, as I excerpt here, that there are some factors that for different regions that will affect that extreme warming and how fast that's changing compared to the mean warming. It also depends on the seasonality of the warming, so warming in winter versus warming in summer. So warming in winter is obviously not going to affect the, all your extreme very much compared to warming in summer. There have been studies looking specifically at the warming of the hottest temperatures, right? So that aspect of the climate extremes. This is one study that looked at tropical land areas and found that in the tropics, in fact, the warming of the highest percentiles is faster than the mean warming. This has to do with feedbacks with the water cycle, right? So there's a relationship between the energy and water, right, and the temperature and moisture, because evaporation leads to cooling. So if you have more of a chance for the land surface to dry out and not be able to evaporate, that could cause the temperature to increase faster. And I'm going to mention a study that I did to look at this question in detail globally using the European analysis. So I won't talk more about the analysis. So my method was to look at the difference between the annual maximum temperature, so this TXX, and the 80th percentile daily maximum temperature, which is a measure of the summer warming as opposed to the year-round warming. And I define amplification as a difference between the two warming rates. So if this was a positive quantity, that would mean that the extreme hot temperatures are warming faster than the average summer temperatures, whereas a negative value for this amplification quantity would mean that the most extreme hottest days are warming slower than the average summer days. These were some results. Well, these are just the average values for the 80th and 100th percentiles for using the analysis. And these are the changes from 1950 to 2021 for the 80th and 100th percentile. So the difference between them is the amplification. Some places, such as Europe, and have a faster, the T100 is warming faster than the T80, which is a measure of a positive amplification, whereas other places, such as parts of the United States, it's the opposite. And I go into this in my paper, so this is the difference between them. The left-hand panel shows the difference between the T100 and T80 on average. That's a very interesting distribution. It's very low over the oceans because the oceans, the water keeps the temperature very constant. So the difference between percentiles is small. And over land, it gets bigger the further you go away from the oceans and towards the poles. And then the important figure is on the right. That's the amplification. So the blue areas of where the extremely hot temperatures are warming slower than the average summer temperatures. The red areas are where the extremely hot temperatures are warming faster. So places like Europe and South Australia, also parts of Asia, for example, inland China. And I extend this beyond the 80th and 100th percentiles, look at all the percentiles. And this is a figure from my paper, the citation is there, looking at the warming cost percentiles by continent. So, for example, in Europe, there's actually, well, let's see, that's this top dashed blue line on the upper left corner. So the warming of the highest percentiles is actually faster than the warming of the median temperatures. In Asia, it's more mixed. Another area that I've looked at is using a probabilistic assessment for the risk of these extreme events. So, for example, we could consider what is the probability that a place like Nepal or Kathmandu will exceed its long-term temperature record over this year or the next 10 years, right? And that probability is probably increasing over time because of global warming. So the question is, how fast is it increasing? I use this kind of approach to estimate the probability of these high temperatures using some kind of distribution that is fitted to the time series of maximum temperature for each year, this TXX series. So typically a generalized extreme value distribution, which is familiar probably for many of you in engineering, is used to fit those extreme series of temperature, for example, also precipitation and other variables. And that can have a trend component to this distribution, and that can be then used to predict the future probabilities. So I have a paper that actually shows that normal distribution works better than the generalized extreme value distribution for the temperature probability, and there are some reasons for that. But in any case, this method can be used then to forecast not just the maximum temperature for 1 year, but again, these very extreme values which are not seen for many years, right, or which haven't been seen in many years. And this would be the kind of example. So this is on the left, we see the series of TXX for some station somewhere, right? So each year has the maximum temperature for that year in degrees centigrade. And then these lines show a forecast for what that will be for future years, so the median and then 5th and 95th percentiles. And then based on that, on the right-hand side, we see the cumulative chance for a new record being set in the future. So assuming some future global warming rate, we can assume that we can say that there'll be at least a 50% probability of a new record being set by, in say, in the next 20 years for that particular station. And this can be improved in several ways, looking at local effects like urbanization and the heat island effect, teleconnections that can affect the where the heat extremes are happening on a particular year. And then there's also the matter of whether we have observations of the past distribution of temperature, right, and how long those series are, so that will also affect the quality of our forecasts. Okay, so now I'm going to move on from just talking about temperature to also talking about humidity, right? Because heat stress depends not only on temperature but also on humidity. So, the most basic picture of heat stress, right, is that we need to stay at a constant temperature of around 37 degrees in order to be at optimal health. So we generate heat, right, in our bodies. We generate more heat if we're working, right, if we're exerting ourselves. And the hotter it is outside, and also the more humid it is outside, because we use evaporation by sweating to dissipate heat. Also, the more difficult it is to dissipate heat, and therefore the more likely it is we will get hotter, because we won't be able to emit enough heat, and then get sick or die if we get too hot for too long. And this is very simplified, so different groups like children and old people are going to be more vulnerable because they're not as able to regulate the temperature, different factors, and also the exertion of sweating and trying to dissipate more heat is a more of a risk factor for people who are in have certain illnesses or disabilities. So a measure of how well we can dissipate heat through sweat is the wet bulb temperature, right? So it's different from the actual temperature or the light bulb temperature. And that's determined by a combination of the temperature and the humidity. So at 100% humidity, the temperature is equal to the wet bulb temperature. But since we are usually at less than saturated humidity, the temperature is going to be more than the wet bulb temperature. In fact, the wet bulb temperature is typically between the dew point temperature and the actual temperature is closer to the dew point temperature. The wet bulb temperature is also more uniform worldwide, because it's largely set by how hot the tropical oceans are, because that determines how much moisture the air is going to typically be able to hold, both in the tropics and also in the exotropical summer. The hottest parts of the ocean are mostly around 31 degrees centigrade, places like the Indonesia warm pool. So typically the wet bulb temperature, it's very rare that it gets above that. But in the lower parts of South Asia, right, it's pretty common for the wet bulb temperature to get to, say, 28 degrees, which was a very, very hot and humid day, where overheating, right, and health impacts of that are going to be a definite risk. And 35 degrees is something of a theoretical upper bound, like, for what people can tolerate, because beyond that you can't even theoretically dissipate enough heat by sweating to keep your temperature at a healthy level. So this is, from the analysis, the maximum wet bulb temperature on the right as opposed to the maximum temperature on the left. So the deserts and mountains in the west of North America, right, and the blue on the right side, those are the ones which have a low wet bulb temperature, even though the actual temperature might be high, but it's very dry, so the air has a very low humidity. Whereas places in the southeast US and that area, like say in Florida, even though the temperature is not extremely high compared to the desert areas, because it's much more humid because it's next to a hot ocean area, the Gulf Stream, and the Gulf of Mexico, and therefore the water temperature is highest there. And also in the Midwest, you have this area where the water temperature is very high. This is trends in water temperature around the United States versus trends in actual temperature. So for the sea area, you have the blue points where the water temperature and the actual temperature trends are similar to each other. But over land, you have the black points, right? So you have no correlation between the water temperature change and the actual temperature change, because there's other factors also that are affecting this water temperature, which need to be considered if we're thinking about how this humid heat is changing. So one study I did was looking at the effect of irrigation on water temperature. So irrigation is interesting because, well, there's a lot of it in South Asia, like especially in India and Pakistan. So it has actually a big effect on climate. And the effect it has on climate includes it reduces the temperature because you have more evaporation, but it can actually increase the water temperature, or at least not decrease it, because it's adding more humidity into the air. My study was one of the first to look at that effect of irrigation, like from this humid heat perspective. So first we compared the water temperature in our model, in the model E, compared to the analysis. We found that there was a reasonable correspondence between the places which have a high water temperature and the model compared to the analysis. So we were able to use this model to look at the effect of irrigation. And what we found is that the temperature effect of irrigation on the left is typically causing a lot of cooling in the summer. So for example, over the Indian subcontinent, right, in the vicinity, there is a lot of cooling because of irrigation. But the effect of water temperature is more mixed. So some places more in the Middle East actually have an increase in the water temperature due to irrigation because of the extra moisture that's being added into the air. Again, there's more to be said about that, but because of time, I'm going to move on. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards if people want to more details on any of this. So I'm going to move to talk about some of the impacts and adaptation, also some of the engineering side, right, of this humid heat and its challenges. So even though humid heat is somewhat, well, it's more uniform than actual temperature worldwide, but certainly it's more severe and also more persistent throughout the year in the tropics. So this is this is using some temperature relative humidity combination, not exactly water temperature, to identify thresholds for higher death rates because of heat, and then a number of days that exceed these thresholds in the historical period on the upper left, and then under 3 scenarios for the late 21st century. Even though there are some days which exceed these thresholds in most of the world, especially under the higher global warming scenarios, in the tropics that will become something that is happening for most of the year. And we see that, right, for example, in this winter, right, spring, we've set a lot of new temperature records in all across the tropics, and also now in this week we have some new records also in India and vicinity because of the hotter oceans, right, and as well as other factors. This is the same paper, but looking at this from a temperature, a temperature humidity space in the lower 2 rows. And then the upper row is looking at the distance from this threshold versus latitude. So again, the tropics are the ones which are closest to this threshold. And then in the lower 2 rows, it's looking at 4 places. Well, actually, no. So sorry. The middle row is looking at 1 place, looking at Jakarta in the equatorial zone, right, in Indonesia. So that's already close to this threshold, and it's going to go across it under a high emission scenario. And then the lower rows is looking at New York, so it's a temperate subtropical climate. where it's now uncommonly above the threshold, but it will become so more in the summer, but not year-round. This is a study looking at the work performance as a function of heat stress. Right? So this is thinking about how much people can work, right? Because if you're working, you're exerting, you're generating more heat, right? So there's a limit to how much people can safely work. This is determined by temperature and humidity. So this figure shows a decline in work performance in percent over the summer under these different scenarios for India due to higher temperatures. So for Nepal, I've seen, so there have been quite a few studies about temperature change in Nepal, but there is not a lot of studies about changes in humid heat indicators like wet bulb temperature. And Nepal is, so the places which have the highest, the most humid conditions, right, are places which are low-lying, and some of them are next to Nepal, right, in the Indian subcontinent, right, especially in the Indus Basin and lowland parts of India and Bangladesh. So this part of, so here we're higher up, which is a very strong protection against having very high humidity, at least compared to the lower areas. But of course, a lot of Nepal is much lower, so humidity certainly is a serious risk. So first, I should note that some of the studies of temperature changes in Nepal have shown that hot extremes at lower elevations in Nepal have not increased, unlike the average temperatures which have increased. And that could be because of irrigation and or change in precipitation patterns, because again, the temperature and the water availability or precipitation are closely linked. So if you have more precipitation and or more irrigation, that could increase clouds and increase evaporation and therefore suppress especially the hottest temperatures. So that might be why we haven't had an increase in the hottest temperatures. So for example, the hottest temperature on record in Nepal has not been that recent, right, unlike the hottest temperature in a lot of other places. But again, there have been very few studies of humid heat extremes, and I think there is even very little data on that you could use for these studies, right, because the humidity is not being measured at, for example, the DHM stations. So I think that there is a serious gap in just being able to identify the risks in Nepal, especially if we look at not just at the temperature, but also at the humidity aspects of heat risks. And then these are some studies that I found in Nepal that do look at heat impacts, for example, in terms of the designs of school buildings and homes, and using reflective pavement for reducing temperatures in cities, and so on. So one adaptation, right, to higher temperature and humidity that has been spreading in many parts of the world, right, has been air conditioning. And this graphic is from a study in New York showing that the higher mortality, that New York has had a reduction in the higher mortality at higher temperatures, right? So meaning that 100 years ago, when there was no air conditioning, mortality would go way up when New York had these very hot days, right? Relatively hot days for New York, not necessarily hot compared to here or to the lower elevations here. Whereas if you look at more recent years, like, you don't see much of that increased mortality. And one of the main reasons for that is that most people have air conditioning, right? So they're not exposed to these hot conditions, at least for the whole day. Also, the remaining mortality that's now in New York is larger earlier in the year because people have not adapted yet, or also have not turned on air conditioning yet. So this is an example of how air conditioning can save lives. On the other hand, air conditioning also has many drawbacks. So first of all, air conditioners do not remove heat. They remove heat from one area, but they move the heat and they generate more heat to other areas, like to the outside. So they don't actually solve the heat problem, they just move it around a little bit. What's even worse, like the air conditioning working fluids, such as fluorocarbons, actually strong greenhouse gases, so they actually make the problem even worse in the long term. Being in air conditioning all the time will reduce the adaptability to heat, assuming that heat is such that you can adapt to it. And finally, air conditioning uses a lot of electricity, right, which actually can cause blackouts, and then you don't have air conditioning. So that is not a problem. And that's also worsened by that hotter conditions, reduce the efficacy of the power generation and transmission, right, due to several reasons, which we will not go into for time. One area of risk that has been looked at is after tropical cyclones. So after tropical cyclones, this is a study, this is a general study, but there have been studies, for example, for Texas. After tropical cyclones, there is not a higher risk than usual of heat waves, but there is a higher risk than usual of not having electricity, especially in the United States, because we've had in the United States, we've had these cyclones where you lose electricity for weeks afterwards. Whereas, for example, in places like Taiwan, it seems like they do better in restoring electricity quickly. And with additional warming, it will become more likely for dangerous heat to happen after tropical cyclones. So one suggestion that this kind of study has looked at has been putting power lines underground, so they're not going to be damaged by tropical cyclones. Right, so this is one example of where you have these compound hazards where the risk from heat can become larger because of other hazards that are also happening. It's also important to think about humid heat as opposed to just temperature, because, as I mentioned, when you have evaporative cooling, so let's say if you add more lakes or you add more evaporation in your city, so you might be reducing temperature, but it might be increasing humidity. So you need to think about also the effect on these humid heat measures. So in terms of irrigation, we might think about having less water-intensive irrigation methods, such as drip irrigation, which I've also worked on in Nepal on one of my previous projects. That would not only save water, but also reduce evaporation compared to having a channel irrigation distribution, and therefore reduce the humidity. So green roofs are one way to have a cooler city, right? So having vegetation on the roofs, but that increases evaporation. You could also have paint roofs or paint surfaces white to reduce the absorption of sunlight. That would reduce both the temperature and the humidity. So cities have a higher temperature but a lower humidity than rural areas. There's an urban dry island effect. So this is something we're looking at in New York City that's using water stations that are located on the city in schools and other places. So in New York, it's more complicated because it's on the coast, so we have these coastal effects. Finally, again, from an engineering perspective, there are these other ideas that we can look into, right? We can study in a combination with meteorology and engineering perspectives. So we can look at renewable energy systems and how they can be used to provide robust cooling and dehumidification when necessary. Right? That could be more resilient than a centralized grid. And then we could also look at things like demand management to reduce the likelihood of a big failure of electric power during a extreme heat event. We could also look at things like personal cooling, right? So instead of cooling the whole building, right, you could imagine you only need to cool the people in the building. We don't need to cool the building, actually, right? So maybe we can design devices that we could use in those contexts, and we could also use those for outdoor work. So those are some examples of such devices from somewhere that sells them. But there's going to be a limit to how much we can do in terms of engineering, right? So we can't protect like all of our animals and plants like from the effect of high temperatures and humidities. The long-term solution is to stop global warming, which will require then international cooperation. So hopefully we can all do what we can for that, as well as pursuing our more local measures for our infrastructure, both in terms of the meteorology and in terms of the engineering preparedness. So again, I wanted to keep this relatively short, so there'll be time for questions. So you can email me, you can find all my publications on my website, you can add me on LinkedIn. And like I said, I think that this is something that Nepal has a preparedness gap for, and if that's something people are interested in discussing with me, or I can maybe give you also contacts of people I've spoken to in other countries, then I'll be happy to continue this conversation. Thank you.
The questions doesn't need to be necessarily addressing to the presentation only, but we can also have some kind of open discussion, and maybe we can co-generate some of the ideas or programs like you have presented. We have here scientists and engineers, so we can, meteorologists and engineers, so we can work together to develop something. So I open the floor for some questions or suggestions or comments.
Thank you, Dr. Neer. My question is regarding urban planning and heat island effect and its adaptation. Did you ever look into cities in Nepal and how they are heating up in places, and if some adaptation measures were implemented? I think it should also be now in policy level dialogue for, local bodies, so that these specific places where there are a lot of heat, we must have some adaptation measures. I think drip irrigation measure, which you mentioned, or cool roofs or pavements, they are a good start. I think they are good points to take it to the local bodies.
What kind of data is used? And another is, have you ever used machine learning or AI for the forecast?
So in terms of the policy in Nepal, I understand that there is there are programs for issuing warnings for extreme heat events. I don't know if they take humidity into account, again, this humid heat aspect. I think that the heat certainly should be included as part of the urban planning. So I don't know. I'm sure people here can comment more about what is being done in those aspects. In terms of the data, so it's a combination of station data. So especially for calculating humid heat measures, we need to have sub-daily measurements of temperature and humidity, at least. And there are some collections of those kinds of data, but they are scarce for a lot of parts of the world, and certainly for Nepal. AI machine learning, we can use those, but they mostly learn from the data that they're given. So if we don't have data to give them, then they're not going to be able to do very much. It's going to be important also to have the data collection.
Any questions?
My question is, how can green roof reduce heat in the context of Nepal comparative to white roof you are mentioning?
Yeah, so both a green roof and a white roof could reduce heat compared to a roof which is some kind of dark material that is not, so basically with a green roof, it's a roof which has vegetation on it, either some kind of vine or has some kind of growing medium or soil that things like some kind of plants grow on, and as a result it will evaporate into the atmosphere, so that will cause cooling in that sense. It won't reduce humidity. It will provide also maybe shading. So that's a green roof, and the white roof involves using a reflective material or paint, right? So that way you will not have the heating from the direct sunlight, so it will stay cooler in that sense. So both of those could be strategies for reducing the heating of buildings. So I think they have pros and cons. So that would be the topic for a good topic for an engineering study, right? So a white roof might be cheaper and require less maintenance, although it will still require, maybe to be repainted to stay white every once in a while. And a green roof might be, more aesthetically pleasing, and maybe it could provide some food also, right? If you couldn't grow some vegetables on your roof, right? So there can be pros and cons.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nira. I thank you for your splendid presentation. I have some specific questions, just for out of my curiosity. In one of your slides, you said that to get the trend of the climate change, temperature trend, you use spline to smoothen the data. My question is, there are so many spline methods. Which particular spline method did you use, like cubic spline or beta spline? Which one you used, and why it is you use spline interpolation? Because it is better than the fitting is better than other techniques, or it is just the normal standard method that spline is used? That's my one question. Another question is in the United States, is the American Society of Civil Engineers, are they recommending some changes or updates in the guidelines on construction methodology, construction techniques to address the impact of heat? For example, expansion, contraction, like that. Are they updating it? And if so, do you recommend similar updates for Nepal too? And the last question is quite similar regarding the occupational health hazard. Is the United States updating its guidelines to update the impact of heat so that the occupational health guidelines are also updated? By the way, this third question is also being asked by someone from the online, from the Facebook. They also ask similar questions. So I think the question that is coming from the Facebook is that Mr. Bhim Bandari is asking the question. He's joining from Facebook live. His question is, what will be the preventive measures for the construction workers working in temperature of 46 degrees? So it's quite high heat, because many Nepalese are going to Gulf countries. They are working in 45, 46, even 50 degrees. So what kind of measures need to be taken for workers' prevention or workers' health for that?
Yes, so those are all good questions. So in terms of splines, so that's kind of a technical topic. I've actually written quite a bit about that over the years. I'm happy to give you references. I contributed some functions to the library on splines. But basically, it's not the only possible way to do smoothing. It's just the convenient way to do smoothing. It does have some theoretical optimal properties, but there are certainly other ways, and it doesn't really matter necessarily not too much which way you use. So that's one. In terms of the ASCE, so I've been part of the Committee for Adaptation and Climate Change, but I've been on the hydroclimatology part, so that deals more with updating the guidelines for the probable maximum precipitation because of the increase in precipitation intensity. For example, for designing sewers, because we expect to have more intense rain that will cause the sewers to get filled up more quickly. So I haven't been as current on the temperature-related design updates. So I can't answer that, unfortunately, but I think that is something that needs to be considered. As far as occupational health, again, I don't have information, but I've been involved with a collaboration that is beginning with NYU, New York University. They have a campus in Abu Dhabi, so they have a lot of people there that are studying that Persian Gulf climate And they have, they do have some of the hottest and most humid conditions in the world. And that is something that they are concerned about. So they do have some efforts that are happening there, and we're trying to get funding to do a collaboration that will combine the meteorological study with the health and policy aspects to try to make an impact on these vulnerable groups like the outdoor workers. And so that will involve perhaps also Bangladesh as well as this Emirates as partners. So we'll see if we can be starting with that with the NYU group in the next months.
I also have follow-up questions after you mentioned about green roof and white roof. So there are definitely research gaps. So what are the the major research gaps to understanding those kind of extreme heats, and especially how can international collaborations, like the ones you are involved in, help these gaps? So this is one question I really want you to address that. And finally, also because you are trying to educate or build up new climate scientists, do you have any suggestions for the climate scientists and engineers, especially who would like to work on extreme heat risks and adaptation? So if you can address also those two questions, then maybe that would be helpful for the young researchers as well.
Yeah, so in terms of green roofs and white roofs, I would say that it's important to do local tests, right, of how well these perform, because it depends a lot on the microclimate and on the building configuration, right, and so on. So that is something that could be done in different cities. And then it also depends on what kind. Yeah. So what are you talking about? People doing those in their own buildings. What kind of buildings are we talking about? Single-family houses or commercial buildings, or government buildings, right, and so on. And in fact, some places, I think California and Australia, for example, they require new buildings to either have white roofs or green roofs or solar panels on the roofs. Right? So that's something that's actually in the policy arena in some places. In terms of young scientists, I would say try to keep up with these specific topics that you're interested in. I think in terms of extreme heat, there's a lot of research that's coming out in the last 10 to 5 years. And also think about what kind of studies you can carry out in your area of the resources you have that could maybe be the first ones in that area, or could make a contribution to raising awareness of these problems in a particular region or sector.
Thank you, Neer, for responding to the questions and giving some suggestions for young scientists as well, because they are the one who will be very active working with you in the near future with already assigned project, as well as developing new future projects related with climate science. So without any delay, because we want to make it within the time, so I'd like to request Dr. Hari Krishna Shrestha, Chairperson of Society of Hydrologists and Meteorologists, Nepal, to conclude the session with some summary of key remarks as well as acknowledgements for today's session. Were there any questions? Oh, okay, go ahead. I didn't realize that. I thought that, there were not any more questions. So, yeah, please go ahead.
So you talked about extreme heat and the indices, and to measure it using the humid temperature. It was very interesting and insightful. However, Nepal is facing prolonged heat days, causing heat waves, especially in the Tarai region. So are there any indices to measure it, and could you please clarify us about how are they related, and are there any adaptation strategies for it?
Please go ahead.
I would like to ask some question about the adaptation. And in the context in Nepal, we have one astrological thinking. Especially in the upper region, we choose a southern face landscape. And in the Tarai region, we choose a northern face. How does the architectural design change help in the reduction of the extremes?
In your presentation, for the future analysis, I found you used SSP 24.5. Why specific that SSP instead of 5.8.5 for extreme weather events? And one more further question. There are many, we along with many are present who are doing graduate and undergraduate course presently. What are the possibilities of doing research further in your institution in US? Thank you.
So you have 4 questions then now, by three people. First one was related with indices, second one was architectural design, and third one about choosing the SSP, and fourth one is a possibility of doing research in City University of New York or City College of New York.
Yeah, so in terms of indices, so there's the heat index. That is something which was developed in the, well, I'm not sure what's developed, I think it was developed in the US, but it's used in the US. In other countries also. Other countries have their own combinations of temperature and humidity that they use for their weather advisories. So those could be used. The heat index was actually recently improved for the extreme values, which were not really considered when it was originally designed. So I think that you know, the indices are there, but there is a need to have the infrastructure for measurement and prediction in place, and then also to have a link to adaptation plans and measures. What's the second question?
It was related with design of houses, architectural design.
Oh yes,
of the faces,
yes. So definitely, design of buildings can be important for reducing the cooling loads by making them more survivable. So, for example, a north-facing building, like a poleward-facing building in the tropics makes a lot of sense, as well as the equator-facing buildings like in the high altitudes. So there are a lot of traditional construction methods that they're certainly known in Nepal that could play an important role. And then the third question, in general, being able to bring in students depends on our funding. That's the main factor. Right? So I mentioned this project at NYU. We're trying to get some funding to work on this extreme heat topics. We're also involved with we're trying to interest insurance companies to pay for some research into different kinds of extreme climate events that would affect their insurance claims. So we'll see if that materializes, then we might be able to look at recruiting students.
There is one more question related with scenarios, future scenarios that you have chosen.
Yes, yeah, so what I showed there uses I think it uses 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5 scenarios. And those are going to make more of a difference beyond the next 20 years, right? Because what's happening now, right, we have warming now, so that's not something that depends on the scenario. The scenarios will affect the further trajectory. There'll be more, again, after the next decade or two, so that's important, but it doesn't really affect too much what you need to do now as far as immediate preparedness kind of needs.
Thank you. I think we have covered one more question, and yeah, so let's have two more questions. One from the online.
There's one more question from someone who is watching this program online. Is Mr. Roshan Oza. His question is for building thermal comfort zone like misting cooling system in outdoor space that can be either fully open or partly closed. How can the humidity factor be considered in a humid hot zone?
Yes. So in New York, we have a lot of that. So in the playgrounds, and we have all the, well, actually people informally open up their fire hydrants when it's hot so they can splash in the water. And the city has been accommodating them and also letting them get sprinkling from the fire hydrants. And there's also sprinklers in the public parks that are on when it's hot. So that's fine as long as it's not very humid. If it is very humid, then at some point that will stop being very effective. So that's a problem, right? So with this humid heat, right? So when you get a certain threshold of humidity, your options for dealing with it become narrower.
Can we have the last question from the?
Well, if we consider city, there are a number of blacktop road network. So if if we are having adaptation to change the color of the blacktop road into light color, then this adaptation will be effective to reduce the extreme heat or not? If yes, then how can we quantify this, and research on this topic has been conducted or not? Thank you.
Yes, so that's reflective pavement, right? So that's something that has been studied, and I don't know the exact findings on it. I think that it could have a role, especially in cities, in reducing the city heating. But it's something that would need to be studied as far as the construction materials for each city and country.
Thank you, Professor Neer Karkaul. So finally, I'd like to request Professor Hari Krishna Shrestha to conclude the session.
Thank you, Dr. Neil, for this excellent presentation. I think there are many who still want to ask questions, but due to time, we have limited it. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Neer for coming all the way from the United States and interacting with us, with this group. They're all very enthusiastic, and we made a simple call for registration, and many of them registered, more than 60 registered for this program. And I was here, I was listening to your lectures. It was very excellent. A few slides I could not catch perfectly because some were too technical, but I think I got most of them. I'm very glad for that. I would like to thank all those who came here by registering here, and some came here on the spot. They did not get time to register, but they still made it. Thank you very much. I would like to thank, especially thank Nepal Engineers Association. They provided the venue, they provided all these facilities for us. And not only that, Nepal Engineers Association has involved the Society of Hydrologists and Meteorologists Nepal in previous occasions also. Like last time when there was a very, very big flood. This year, what is it, 2024 now? 2024, very big flood. They had made a committee to investigate what are the reasons and what are potential mitigation measures. And the Nepal Engineers Association involved, they invited us to be part of the study process. Similarly, this association NEA has also been kind enough to provide some space, locker space for us here to deposit some stuff here. Similarly, today we are here together, Nepal Engineers Association, jointly with Fulbright. I think they have sponsored your travel, I guess. And also this society, the Small Earth Nepal, and we have Small Earth Nepal and the Society of Hydrologists and Meteorologists. We have been working together on many such similar programs. Similar, so I would like to specially thank this Small Art Nepal also, because they have been assisting and collaborating with Society of Hydrologists and Metallurgists Nepal here. I'm very glad to see prominent figures, the figures of the persons of national and international stature, like Dr. Madan Lal Shrestha. He was the former DG, Director General of this Department of Hydrology and Meteorology Nepal, and he is also this academician of Nepal Science NAST, Nepal Academy of Science and Technology. So such prominent figures are here. Similar, I can see many other figures here. Many are very prominent and aspiring students who would like to get in touch with you for further research, collaborations, and you guiding them. So they are here too. So with this kind of good collaboration, I hope this program doesn't end here. We can explore further collaboration activities with you, your institutions, and find some other enthusiastic and highly motivated students here. We have some other PhD holders here too. Dr. Prasanna is here, the Prasamsa is here, and there are many others who have who would be like to collaborate with you in further research specific to Nepal and South Asia region. So with this, I would, rather than saying much, I would like to end this vote of thanks to you, a vote of thanks for this NEA and SEN and Fulbright and all those who came here. Thank you very much.